He's a Ukrainian hero, a Canadian hero, and we thank him for all his service. Thank you.
Liberals always love to run around and tell people that they're Nazis if they disagree with them or if they question any of their policies. But remember that the next time you hear a liberal refer to a conservative as a Nazi, just think that a Liberal MP, the Speaker of the House, invited an actual Nazi into the House of Commons. Hello, I'm Adrienne Batra. With me is Brian Lilley. Brian, I'm not overstating that, am I?
No, you're not. And in fact, you saw off the top, Speaker Anthony Rota thanking this man for his service. Then, that came after he introduced him in the House of Commons, and MPs gave him the first of two standing ovations. So, look, Adrienne, this man is 98. He's not a threat to anybody. It's understandable why he would have fought against the Russians back in the Second World War, because the Russians were the oppressors of the Ukrainian people, and somebody else came along and said, hey, we'll help you get rid of them. That's all understandable. But what's not understandable is this man being introduced in the House of Commons while Volodymyr Zelenskyy is there, and Russia is trying to say, we have to invade Ukraine to get rid of the Nazis. It's absolutely gobsmackingly stupid that Rota did this. And look, I can't see a single scenario where the PMO wasn't involved in reviewing the list of people who were going to be invited and introduced.
I wanted to ask you that because every single member of Parliament from all parties and all stripes were in that House of Commons when President Zelenskyy was there and being honored. Everyone stood, everyone applauded. Yeah. Even though some Liberal MPs didn't think that Polyev applauded enough, which was bizarre in of itself. But so it's kind of it's a pox. You feel like it's a pox on all their houses. But that said, in the Conservative leader statement, I think it was fair to say there is an expectation of elected officials that when there are special guests invited, there is a vetting. That the PMO or the Speaker's office or the Privy Council office, there's a vetting done of these individuals. So I can't really blame the opposition parties for standing there and applauding, because the story sounds good.
Yeah, or individual Liberal MPs in the backbenches, or even cabinet ministers. They would not have known. The Speaker of the House is the person in control of the House of Commons. We know that. That is how it operates. He was, Mr. Hunka was in the Speaker's gallery. He was introduced by the Speaker. So primarily this falls on Rota. But I said I can't see a single scenario where PMO wasn't involved in looking at the list. I'll tell you, as this story started to break out from, people chatting about it on the internet to it being confirmed by various groups and confirmed by the Speaker's office and the PMO, I was sitting watching football with a bunch of guys who have all worked in politics, various political stripes, including in Liberal PMOs. And they're looking and saying, there's no way PMO didn't look at this. There's one guy said, there's no way there weren't 10 pair of eyes on this. So, you take it from me, someone who has covered politics for more than 20 years. You can take it from people who have worked in those offices. And everybody says the same thing. There is no way somebody didn't look. And if they saw this, they should have went and said, well, wait a minute. Who in Ukraine was fighting the Russians in the Second World War? Well, they were in Nazi units. We can't invite this guy and have him stand there and be applauded with Zelenskyy in the chamber, because the Russians will take it as a victory. And we've already seen them doing that. The Russian embassy in Canada putting out statements, putting up images saying, look, we told you there were Nazis. This is the problem. So it feeds into the Russian narrative and completely obliterates what was a lot of goodwill. Most Canadians support Ukraine. This feeds into the Russian narrative. It feeds into those Canadians who buy the Russian misinformation, and it's going to expand the number of people who say, Are we really supporting Nazis? Should we be backing this guy? It absolute gobsmackingly stupid.
Well, you have an invited guest from a country where they are fighting a war, an illegal war against an aggressive invader, and he is perceived as a rock star. I mean, Zelenskyy has done extraordinary work with his countrymen and fighting against the Russians. And does he feel embarrassed? Does he feel that he's been not taken advantage of, but certainly humiliated in a sense, because he stood there and he raised his fist when they introduced Hunka in the House of Commons. I mean, there's an expectation certainly from a foreign dignitary that these people are vetted as well, right?
I would imagine so. And look, I was not invited to meet President Zelenskyy. I was not in contact with him. And while he was here in Canada, both in Ottawa and Toronto, it was an event incredibly tightly controlled by the Prime Minister's office. That event in Fort York Armory, where on Friday night, where people cheered him, it was Liberal staffers who were invited, past Liberal staffers, Liberal MPs, half the Liberal cabinet. It was an event to show how great Justin Trudeau is, how great a friend Justin Trudeau is to the Ukrainian people. They barely had representatives of the Ukrainian Canadian community there compared to the number of Liberal partisans. That's how tightly controlled it was by PMO. So I imagine that Zelenskyy, knowing all of this, is absolutely furious at Justin Trudeau and the PMO. Has Canada done a lot for Ukraine? Absolutely. Have we committed to do more? Absolutely. The PM, I'll even give him credit, is now pushing an idea that Bill Browder has been suggesting for a long time, and that's saying, look, central banks and Western governments around the world have seized Russian assets, including cash deposits that they left with other central banks, including here in Canada. We've seized it already. The law says we can hand it over to Ukraine, give them that money. That's all good. But this one incident tarnishes the entire trip, the entire message, the entire support.
We know the Liberals' polling numbers have been tanking. And in fact, whatever channel changers and trying to change the narrative that Trudeau has attempted in the last couple of weeks, at least public opinion polling hasn't caught up with any of that. And it's not indicating, and it's not no indication that's made much of a change. I note that yet another disastrous trip to India. Then fast forward a few days, we find out that the Liberal government of Canada is accusing the Indian government of allegedly being involved in an assassination of a Canadian to perhaps, shift the narrative around that Trudeau's looking strong. Then, the president of Ukraine comes to Canada, stands shoulder to shoulder with Trudeau again. A desire, I suppose, Brian, on behalf of the Trudeau folks to change the narrative of sagging poll numbers. And now this. And by the way, in that accusation against India, Canada stands alone. You can look at headlines now all around the world about this issue with Zelenskyy's visit to Canada is now mired in this issue of the speaker inviting a Nazi. And how do you come back from that?
It's going to be incredibly difficult. The government has embarrassed itself on more than one occasion. Look, on the issue of accusing India, I've been saying for a week now that we've got to the government has to put some evidence in the window because we don't have the strong support that we need from our allies. Putting that bit of evidence out doesn't need to be the whole case, would force Modi's hand. The Prime Minister hasn't done that. He has essentially said, just trust me. And what we saw over this weekend trip with Zelenskyy is part of why Canadians don't trust him. This is a government that is aging out, that is off its game, that is not delivering, whether it's on domestic policies or on trips like this. And it's going to be a hard road back. Look, there was a poll out. It was a late night Friday poll by Frank Graves at Ecos Research. So take that for what you will. Ecos, Graves has a history of making strident partisan statements online and then walking them back in the early morning hours of morning. He put out a poll saying that they're 20 points back of the Pierre Poilievre's Conservatives. I don't buy that for a second. But if the government keeps going in the direction it has over the past couple of weeks, those numbers that I don't think are true now could become true.
Do you see any scenario where, look, in any scandal with the Liberals, and frankly, any scandal, take your party, take your issue, take your level of government, the head of the government usually doesn't take the fall. It's usually a cabinet minister, it's usually a staffer, it's usually someone else that you throw under the proverbial bus. And that's likely going to happen in this instance. We saw a very hastily written apology from the Speaker of the House, Anthony Rota. Do you see any scenario that by the time this video goes up for our subscribers to see, that Rota is still the Speaker of the House?
I mean, his potential. I've never seen a speaker removed. I don't know what the process is. It would involve MPs from all parties because that's how a speaker is voted in. And so if there is a mutiny among MPs, they could force a new speaker. They could force Rota to step down. We could see him do the honorable thing and resign. But he is, I don't see him sticking around for long in this role. The unfortunate part is I don't see Justin Trudeau facing any consequences from this, nor his office. And of course, he's the man that has gone around, as you said off the top, calling everyone Nazis, including Melissa Landsman, an MP who is the child of Holocaust survivors, an MP who is Jewish herself. He accused her of standing with Nazis. Well, Justin, you invited one into the House of Commons. You failed to protect the institution that is the House of Commons. Mm-hmm. But he's not going to face any consequences. Rota definitely could.
Well, we'll have more coverage on this and the fallout from yet another Canadian humiliation. Go to thetorontosun.com and hit that subscribe button. You're going to find more information and coverage on stories like this and others you will not find anywhere else.